everybody, tonight we are debating, should the government prevent censorship by big tech, and we are starting right now.
Hey V, I heard some soldier just opened fire on pedestrians at the theater. If you can swing it, I want him stopped but not killed. Then I'll send the right people for you. More details are on the way. And V, good luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. This is going to be a fun one, folks. Want to let you know a few things up front. First, if it's your first time here, we are thrilled to have you, no matter what walk of life you are from, and want to let you know that Modern Day Debate is a neutral platform where we strive to host debates on science, politics, and religion on a neutral platform. So, want to let you know a few things regarding the channel as well. If you are like us, if you're sick in the head and you like juicy, controversial debates, consider hitting that subscribe button, as we have many more juicy debates coming up. For example, you'll see at the bottom right of your screen, we are pumped, you guys. Whew, January 8th is coming so fast. I want to do a quick little mention about this if you have not heard about it somehow. If you've been in a cave on Mars with your fingers in your ears, want to let you know we are pumped for our Kickstarter that we are currently running, and you can see the progress of on the far right of your screen. In particular, the reason we are having this Kickstarter is because we're trying to have new guests, and a lot of these new guests oftentimes they have honorariums that we will be sending to these guests in order, you could say, in order to kind of help spread the risk, because it's one thing for me to risk like, oh, okay, we can risk like, let's say, $500, like we'll probably make up for it in like super chats or ads, and if we don't, other debates will help make up for it. But in some cases, these honorariums are a lot bigger, and that's something that I can't quite risk. That is why, for only $3, folks, the price of a cup of coffee, you can watch Dr. Michael Shermer, New York Times bestseller, been a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, as well as, I mean, the guy he's got tons of different credentials and different things that he's done. He will be debating IP on whether or not Christianity is dangerous to society. So want to say that Kickstarter link is in the description, folks. Feel free at any time. You only got, I think it's 7 days, as you see at the bottom right of your screen, to sign up for that Kickstarter, to watch it live, and just make it happen all together. Otherwise, if we don't get enough Kickstarter support, we aren't actually able to have the event at all. So we do need to reach that goal that is shown at the top right of your screen. And with that, I want to mention a couple of other things we're really excited about. One, the last time we tried to have this debate, I want you all to know it was 100% my fault that we had the technical errors that we did, and I'm so sorry about that, especially to Carissa, because she set this debate up. It was her great idea, and want to say huge thanks to Carissa for her patience. She's out tonight. She's trying to catch up on sleep, among other things. So I want to say Carissa does a fabulous job, seriously, like tremendous job. That kind of those bloopers last time were 100% me. So thanks for your patience. And last thing is, I want to say huge thank you, in addition to saying thank you to Carissa, to Dave Langer, who helped us recently get Twitch affiliate status. So really exciting, folks. If you happen to be on Twitch, folks, I want to let you know, if you have Amazon Prime, you have a free Twitch subscription, and then, hey, if you want, you can use it for Modern Day Debate now, because we are now an affiliate and can now have subscribers. So really cool. And I want to say again, thanks to Dave Langer, as well as Lily Aja, and many others who helped us kind of learn the ropes regarding Twitch. So we're going to introduce our speakers. We're thrilled to have these guys. Thanks for your patience through all that channel housekeeping stuff. We are very excited to have these guys here. It's going to be epic, folks. Want to remind you, all of their links are in the description. We're going to start going left to right on your screen. So we'll start with Jangles. First saying, thanks so much for coming back on, Jangles. It's a true pleasure to have you back on. And what can people expect to find at your link?
Thanks for having me back on, James. So, hello everyone, my name is Justin. I, for some reason, go by Jangles on the internet. So I have a YouTube channel called JanglesScienceLad. I've done several debates. A couple of them are on this channel right here, and also do lots of YouTube videos with academic citations out the wazoo. So again, YouTube at JanglesScienceLad, and you can follow me on Twitter at SJWDebates.
Thanks so much. Glad to have you back. And Jay Stenstrom, stoked to have you with us again. Thanks so much for being with us. And if you want to let people know what people can expect to find at your link, Thanks so much. We have a little bit of a connection issue. There might be a little bit of buffering, folks. This is unusual. Give me one sec. I just want to make sure that you're able to share about your link. It started right after Jangles. Okay, I think we're in the clear now. Sorry much. And Distributist, pumped to have you here. If you can let people know what they can expect to find in your link in the description, we'd love to hear it, and thanks for being here.
Sure. I run a YouTube channel called TheDistributist, and I largely make video essays about, I would say, sort of neo-reactionary ideas intermixed with some other thoughts I have about modern culture and the evolution of history. And yeah, longer video essays, and sometimes I do debates, which is what I'm doing tonight.
Absolutely. Thrilled to have you back. And A Straight Lattes. Am I pronouncing it right? Please let me know. Thanks so much for being here. And if you'd like to share what people can expect to find at your link, please do.
Sure thing. I'm Andrew Stratalites, and you will find at my Twitter link musings on culture, science, mathematics, philosophy, and religion.
What's up?
I'm sort of in the same social network as Dave the Distributist. I'm a traditional Anglican and consider myself an American Tory politically.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And with that, we will jump into our opening statements. Now, this is flexible. So guys, if you guys had decided anything outside of the conversation that we had on Twitter today in terms of who goes first, usually the affirmative would be going first, which is Distributist, and Andrew. And in this case, though, if you guys want to change it up, you can. And that's just a flexible 5 to 10 minute opening statement, as much as 15 minutes if you guys want, where you can split it between yourself. And who would like to go first?
Well, I can kind of go first. I'm a little bit rambly because I don't pre-prepare these things, but
No problem.
if Andrew would like to let me go first, or do you want to go first, Andrew?
The dealer's choice. Dave, go ahead.
Okay, great. So our resolution today is, should the government basically regulate large social media corporations? And I'm really, I guess, once again, I suspect that we're going to have some argument over the resolution, but I'm going to take this on its face. The problem is I don't really see how we can't at some point need this kind of regulation. Unless you're a complete anarcho-capitalist, which I'm fairly sure none of the people on the opposite side of this debate are, you are probably aware that monopoly power and perverse monopolies with perverse incentives involved are a natural function of any market economy, even if you do believe in market economies, which I'm not so sure about that. And what we're entering into right now, the environment we're entering into after 1 year of this COVID virus, is an environment where the vast majority of communications go through 3-4 social media providers. I work an ordinary job, and it all goes through Zoom. All communications that has to do with media go through Twitter and Facebook. And even the classical publications, like the New York Post, they have to use Twitter in order to get any kind of clout or coverage. So what we have is a natural or unnatural monopoly in the case of this COVID, handing unprecedented amount of media control over to these social media corporations. And inside this monopoly power, which would be a problem in and of itself, these corporations are essentially trying to have it both ways. They are giving themselves the ability to completely edit out opinions that they don't like, and then at the same time, they want to be covered from any kind of liability by the idea that they are simply platforms and not publishers. So they want to act both as publishers one moment and then platforms in the very next. And this, quite frankly, is totally insane. It's the same formula that we've seen 1,000 times before from corporate power, essentially private profit and public liability. Again, I know my opponents aren't anarcho-capitalists. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is usually considered a problem in most other contexts. I know this is the example we started off with last time, but last time, sort of key example of this was the censoring of the New York Post's coverage of Hunter Biden's email leaks. Now, New York Post is a classic media, it's a classic publisher. They decided to publish a story about leaks of emails. that came from a Hunter Biden laptop that showed potentially illegal behavior on the part of a government actor. So what we have is potentially illegal government abuse. And Twitter decided that they just wouldn't cover that. They essentially muted the New York Post from the most prominent public platform ahead of one of the most important elections, or one of the biggest elections that we've had in recent memories. And they did this basically on the whim of their managerial staff, probably, and this is speculation on my part, because they saw the release of those emails to be detrimental to their profit bottom line. Now, the excuse given, and here I'm incorporating some knowledge that was provided last time, the excuse given were, these emails were hacked. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's a cover your ass excuse. By hacked, all they need is legitimately obtained. And if this was the first time, if we were born yesterday, this might seem kind of logical in isolation. The problem is that we've had hacked sources be part of ordinary journalism since the beginning of modern journalism. Very famously, people have heard about the Pentagon Papers. These were sort of the bombshell papers that came out that exposed the Nixon and LBJ administration's abuses in Vietnam. They were borderline illegal, and when they were released by the New York Times, I believe, the guy who leaked them, Ellsworth, was under investigation for espionage, which was dismissed on a technicality because of Watergate a few years later. This was this would be considered a hack before there were computers. And it was a bombshell for the country. It exposed potentially illegal behavior, and it really, and this was considered for a very, very long time to be the height of professional journalism. At this stage, this future that we're staring down, social media could just have prevented that story from ever being published. It could have covered the government's ass. It could have covered LBJ's ass on this, and they could just, they're illegally obtained. And then the American people would never have that information. What really our opponents seem to be proposing is, it's almost kind of strange. They seem to want to say that for reasons they can only chalk up to tactical anarcho-capitalism, that any kind of protection we have on monopoly has to be blown up. In addition to that, our understanding of the responsibility for publishers and the responsibility to communicate potentially illegal activity to the American people has to be destroyed. And for what reason? Because of a free market? Again, it makes absolutely no sense to me. If we want to have any kind of understanding that there is some kind of responsibility of these platforms, we have to regulate at some stage, because these platforms are monopolies. They're acting like monopolies, and they're fundamentally lying to the American people about what role they play. Now, I want to end my talk with sort of an analogy here. So imagine this wasn't 2020, but 1920. And imagine, as in 1920, there were many monopolies in both radio and in railroads. Imagine if the railroad and telegraph and radio monopolies got together one day and they decided to just get rid of incriminating evidence that came out about politicians that they liked. And so the New York Times could publish whatever they wanted to. But then the monopolists would just nix that. It would never go out on the radio. It would never go out on broadsheet, because they relied the distribution mechanisms would be nixed. Everyone would recognize that as both an abuse of monopoly and also corporate interference with a quote-unquote democratic decision-making process. But somehow, the second these things go digital, our brains fall out of our heads. And what was obviously abusive in one era becomes sort of this free speech excuse, which is, every time I've seen it in
Hey,
court,
got a client.
dig right down to it,
Well,
is an excuse
actually,
that only
it's just
a lawyer
Nancy's
could
son
possibly
who's looking
believe
to get
if he's
back
being
something that
paid
was
to
stolen.
believe it.
And yeah,
So, I look
that
forward to
Nancy.
discussing this,
The
but
one who
I'm
punched
genuinely
keys in Samurai.
flabbergasted how there could
one more
be
thing.
a
If you could
pushback
recover this
on
gong's
the
wheels
reasonable
too,
idea of
that'd be real
regulating
nice.
monopoly that is demonstrably
So,
interfering
you
with
in?
an electoral
If
process.
so, find the details attached.
You bet. Thanks so
I'd-
much. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I just have a few points that I'd like to underline that Dave sort of implicitly discussed. One is, basically, in a democratic republic like the United States, the assumption is that the way things function is that the sovereignty and responsibility of finding out the truth of things is diffused through all of society. And social media has a significant, important role to play in enabling this. And as such, that's why it's important that they don't censor things to prevent society to come to understanding of truth of things, be it about politicians or policies or the past or the future. And fundamentally, that's the issue, is that if the government doesn't cause that to occur, then we are implicitly giving that responsibility of determining what the truth is to some other institution besides society at large. And I mean, there are societies that are set up this way, but that's not how we're supposed to be set up. And that's fundamentally what this is about, is to provide that function. I don't really trust companies to be rational, even when they are trying to work in their profit interest, because companies are run by people, and people have social pressure and hidden agendas, and there's no real strong incentive for social media to publish true information that is damaging to their managers' hidden agendas. And that's why we need some sort of regulation
Because I already have
just
five.
to
You can't force the
make
sixth
sure
on
that
me.
it's a
Oh,
fair
hi,
game, right?
it's,
Just the same way that we
Cynthia, Pepe's wife?
regulate things like air
Remember me?
pollution,
Yeah, I do.
or things
I
of
don't know
that
what you
sort.
told him, but
And this was supposed to
Thank
be
you
the
so
deal of
much.
Section 230, which is that in exchange for them giving up editorial control and just being like a communication device, that they wouldn't be responsible for what people said, because they were providing a communication medium, as opposed to something like the New York Times, which
contours of your
curates
awareness are much
information.
clearer now. The knot in your mind is beginning
So
to unwind.
that's
You are
what I'm
drowning
going to
in
end
the
it on.
here
Is
and
fundamentally
now.
this is about enabling truth to be found through our social processes. These companies take a very important part in that, and they are using their power to supplant the rightful sovereignty of society at large to discover the truth.
I think I'm starting to get the hang of all
Thanks
this.
so much.
Inner harmony is
Amazing.
I
like
forgot to
coming
mention,
home
by the
from
way,
a
we are
long journey.
really excited that we
Do not cling too
also
tightly
just
to
got
your
our
thoughts,
podcast on
but
Audible
allow
and
them to
Amazon
flow
Music. So
freely.
one last channel
Does a
housekeeping
toad
things.
clench
Want to
its
also remind
fist
you,
when
all
it
of our guests are
swings?
linked in the description.
What is
that
the sound
includes
of one
Jangles,
hand
Jordan,
clapping?
Distributist, and
That
Andrew.
depends.
So with
Is
that, we'll kick it
someone
over to
clapping
Jangles
with
and
you?
Jordan. Thanks so much, gentlemen,
I
for
wanna
being
try
here, and the
another one.
floor is all yours.
How much would you
Excellent.
like to pay
All right,
this
so I think
time?
Dave was definitely right. We're gonna have to do some communication to figure out like
Will this
what
be enough?
exactly we're going over. I mean, obviously we are not
Yes.
saying that there should be
You
no
may
regulation
begin.
whatsoever. It's just
I will guide you.
should the government be able to step in and like prevent censorship by big tech? So we'll get into that, I'm sure. So for what it's worth, I think no, the government should not be able to force platforms to host content they do not want to host. I do not like the idea of unelected billionaires deciding what parts of my speech are not fit for public consumption, but I like the idea
are
of
in
a
the
farcical and
forest.
contradictory,
We see
politically neutral
rays of
form of content
sunlight
moderation
pierce
being
the
enforced
canopy,
by the government
dancing
a
and
whole lot
weaving
less.
into the tongues of
Yes,
flame
platforms
below.
often enforce their TOS inconsistently and without much
fire,
transparency.
Spirit of the
Yes,
sun,
platforms have an
I send
enormous
you
reach in today's world and
greetings.
hold much
You
sway
give
over the public
beauty to
conversation.
all
And
things.
yes, platforms should be held
I
at least
am
partially
you,
responsible
and
for
you
actions
are
made
me.
possible by their avenue of
There is no
communication.
life without you.
But these problems are made
You I was
worse,
created,
not better,
and to
by the
you I
government
will
stepping in to
return.
prevent these private platforms from cracking
Spirit of
down
the
on the
sun,
content they allow. Much
primordial
of the
fire,
censorship these
burn
platforms are
all
engaging in has to do with the
impurity from my
rampant spread
body
of
and soul,
misinformation.
and the
As recent
negative
events have
energy
shown,
of
or really
negative
the entirety of
people,
political history has
worlds,
shown, but recent events should jump out at
dimensions.
you, what politicians
every
deem
cell in
true
my
is
body.
very often synonymous
the
with what is
energy of
politically
life,
convenient.
health,
To take one such recent
youth,
example, Senator Josh
wisdom,
Hawley said that he will
knowledge,
object to the
strength,
certification of electoral
joy,
college results,
and
despite a complete
happiness.
lack of evidence of
Give
any
me
sort of widespread
lasting
voter
inner
fraud.
peace,
Senator
so that
Hawley
no
was also
one may
behind the most
shake me
extreme
from my
conservative push to
sacred
limit the protections
equilibrium.
of platforms under Section 230 to those that operate without political bias. Ask yourself if you want people like Senator Hawley, someone very willing to endorse outright falsehoods and subvert the democratic will of the American people, to be determining what is and is not politically biased. Put another way, do you want the government to force platforms to allow the spread of politically convenient lies in order to benefit Washington bureaucrats, regardless of your political identity? To address something that Dave said, one of the reasons that Section 230 was implemented was based on a case called, let's see, Stratton, I can't read my own handwriting, basically Stratton v. Prodigy. So back in 1994, this person on a message board, I guess the closest thing to a modern equivalent of Twitter, said some defamatory things accusing this like investment banking firm of fraud. And then the investment banking firm sued that person for defamation and also sued the platform. Now, it turns out that person was right. That this investment banking firm was engaging in a lot of fraud. They lost their license like a year after this was after this case was settled. I'm not sure that what you're proposing would limit these things, because now if you hold a platform liable to things, they're going to crack down way more on what is allowed to be put on their platform.
Of course that would happen.
Do you really want the government to be able to? Do you really want companies to be able to sue for defamation for potentially like damaging things they say about the company? To address something that Andrew said, yeah, I agree. It is not a perfect system whatsoever. The truth is a very a touchy subject, but I also don't think that allowing the rampant spread of misinformation, of conspiracy theories, of baseless claims of things like voter fraud that it could be, potentially lead to damaging and societally
baseless. It's baseless. If I say baseless 5 times, it will become baseless.
And so, yeah, I don't have a perfect answer to this, and we'll do some discussion on it, but I don't, just allowing this free-form spread of misinformation, I don't think is a good thing, so.
Thanks so much. Floor is yours, Jordan.
Alright, so yeah, I don't have any kind of a formally written out opening statement here, but I did take some notes over the last 3 speeches, and there's just a handful of things that I want to cover.
I want to cover means
honestly,
I disagree with.
let's just get into the meat of it here. I completely understand where both Dave and Andrew are coming from on this issue. As somebody who grew up incredibly conservative, as somebody who grew up believing in a lot of the values that not necessarily they espouse, but would somewhat align with them on this issue, I understand why there's a lot of frustration when it comes to things like big tech and social media censorship, especially when it's coming out of
You've grown up in a conservative household. That's not the same thing as growing up conservative.
And I'm not going to be deaf to the concerns that are brought up there, but I don't think a couple of things. First off, I don't think that the way that regulation would be implemented on an on-the-ground level would necessarily solve a lot of the problems that the Distributist and Andrew are talking about. I actually think that it would make a lot of these problems, particularly the problem of monopoly power, a lot worse. So I'm gonna probably wrap with monopoly power because it's one of the things that I think is a key. It's an interesting topic, and it's something that could really carry the rest of this discussion if we let it have its day in the sun. But there's some other things that are, I think, a little bit more prescient to the issue at hand. So first off, there was a lot of talk that was brought up around the story about the New York Post being censored on Twitter's platform due to a hack materials policy. There's a lot of subpoints into this, but first I just want to clarify, in our pre-tape, in our first attempt at having this debate, I was actually the one who started talking to Dave a little bit on the New York Post case, and I just want to kind of highlight for people where I got that information. This wasn't some like BS like legalese.
Why do I get the feeling that judging people
I
on how
actually
they
have
look
good
and
reason
feel
to believe that Jack Dorsey
we're
was
so
telling the truth
slightly
when it comes
beyond
to
you.
the New York Post case. Primarily because he actually said that the hack materials point was primarily why the New York Post had its content removed in front of Congress under oath. And now I understand that might just be some, limited cop-out, but the other thing that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about whether or not Twitter's being a good faith actor here is the New York Post actually had the complete ability to put this story back out after having their account suspended. And the original decision that Twitter made was undone within 24 hours after they realized that they'd made a mistake on this story. So I know it doesn't actually, and it doesn't at all even excuse Twitter for, you know, removing the publication of the New York Post. But we can't just throw this out and say, well, this was just some, like, trying to narrow around because we're trying to help Biden. So Dave also talked about this idea of the Pentagon Papers, which I think the way that he talked about it was rather interesting, and there's a lot that can be delved into here. I understand the significance of the Pentagon Papers. I understand what it meant for free speech in general, but we need to consider something here. The Pentagon Papers were published by a news organization.
What do you want?
I lost my train of thought there. Let's rewind back to what I was going to say. One of the things with the New York Post story that I think gets really overlooked and neglected, especially when we talk about the ubiquity of things like social media, just because Facebook and Twitter might have taken issue with the New York Post reporting doesn't mean that this is something that was censored off of the face of the earth. And I think this actually comes down to the crux of the argument that we need to be making when it comes to things like social media in the first place. Social media, yes, does have a lot of power, but in no way, shape, or form are they monopolies, especially when it comes to the broad reach of the internet. First off, the New York Post, when they posted their story to Twitter, were linking back to the New York Post's own website. That's a way that they have an ability to speak, and a way that they have an ability to keep their foot in the door and be a part of the conversation. Right? We're not talking about the idea of, you know, for instance,
Who's that girl you were talking to?
Twitter is not like Spectrum. Twitter didn't go, hey, I don't agree with what you're saying about Joe Biden, therefore we're just going to get rid of everything that you have up to this point, and we're just not going to let this story get out.
Earlier you thought of a joke. You're sentient.
One of the other big things that needs to be talked about is this idea of publisher versus platform, and it gets brought up a lot in a lot of conservative circles, but it's something that really needs to be hammered in if we're going to get anywhere here.
That's what I thought.
There's this idea that floats around in a lot of conservative circles that when just because Twitter, Facebook, and all of these other entities decide that they're going to be removing content every once in a while that violates its terms of service, that it suddenly becomes some sort of a publisher, which has both been debunked inside of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who ended up dealing with this case when Prager University sued YouTube for shadow banning some of its content. But the other place where this was dealt with is honestly inside of the legislation that created Section 230 in the first place. I think that we need to realize that when the internet was being created, it put a lot of these platforms into really tricky positions, which is why Section 230 exists in the first place. If you're a company like Twitter or Facebook, or even back in the day, something like AOL or an email provider, the general understanding was if you were hosting this platform, we didn't actually know what to do with you legally, right? There was this big question of whether or not...
Oh my god, don't tell me what I already know. Shut up.
Because the more that you knowingly knew of illegal activity, the more likely it was that you could potentially be held culpable for any of it existing on your platform.
This is boring.
So when Section
Shut up.
230 came into the mix, it was actually to allow the expansion of speech, and actually to allow these platforms to take things off that the government had already deemed illegal and weren't allowed to be out inside of the open. The last thing that I kind of want to talk about is monopoly power, because this really is kind of the crux of everything that we have inside of this conversation. But I understand why it's frustrating to deal with platforms like Facebook and
But you're gonna have
Twitter, but I don't see how legislating them to behave in a free and open manner necessarily solves any of the problems that we have up until now. Primarily due to the fact that any kind of a regulation that you put on these giant monolithic companies that have the resources to deal with anything coming down the pike actually is more likely to cut down on competition and is more likely to cause other entities to not be able to enter the space. There have been some great examples of this if you want to go look into any of the regulation around particularly FOSTA and what that did to a lot of particularly places like Tumblr. But sadly I didn't tag any of that here. This was a little bit more rambly than I would have liked, but I think I can cede the floor with that.
Do you mind if I go next?
Thanks so much. We can jump right into open conversation, and so thanks so much, and also thanks so much to those of you. We have jumped from 70% to 77% on the meter on your right for the Kickstarter for January 8th debate. And so thank you so much to those of you who have pledged during the debate. Really appreciate it. And we'll jump right into that open conversation. The floor is all yours, guys.
Okay. So one thing that Jangles brought up is that he doesn't trust the government to determine what is true and false. And I agree. I do not trust the government to determine what is true and false. This is actually a very unique and asymmetrical situation because preventing censorship doesn't actually need to determine whether something is true or false. What we're actually doing is making that the responsibility of the consumer or the reader to determine what is true and what is false. Jangles is concerned about misinformation, but I am actually, ironically, going to do the classic liberal view on this and say that the best cure for misinformation is having free flow of information that shows how it is wrong. This ties in a little bit about what Jordan was talking about with how Twitter isn't really censoring because they have like community guidelines and it's not really a monopoly because other things exist. And there are a couple things here. One is even if it isn't a monopoly, basically it's Pareto distributed, which means that these companies have significantly more power than other things, right? Free markets work best when there are a large number of relatively same-sized actors giving fungible things. But social media is very distinct from that because it actually has a network effect into it, right? I can't take my Twitter followers and take them to Facebook very easily, or to things like that. So even if they're not a classical monopoly, they have significantly more power and influence than previously. The other thing is there's a difference between regulating content and form of information. So a great historical example of this is blasphemy laws, right? To blaspheme is to basically desecrate something holy with speech. But blasphemy laws did not actually cover reasonable and cogent critiques of religion. And so a compromise that I would be willing to accept, and I think it would actually be sort of an ideal, is that, let's say, Facebook and Twitter had rules about what civic discourse was, and politeness, and things like that. But that doesn't include the content, it just includes how you say it. If that was implemented and done in an even-handed way, I think that would work really well. And I think that can be implemented without doing things like causing regulatory capture. Having a transparent and audible system of determining whether content meets standards for civility is something that could easily be done for any company that has that type of community guideline. We can also implement other things that would require a more open social media world, like requiring all social media to publish their protocols. So it's not something that necessarily will stifle competition. And even if it did, there are ways to remediate that. The final point that I want to end on is attempts to reduce disinformation by eliminating people's access to it tend to backfire. So a great example of this is the Roman Catholic Church used to have something called the Index, which was an index of books that contained heresies that no one could read. And what tended to happen in the 20th century and even the 19th century is it sort of got this forbidden fruit type thing, where people were actually more interested in reading books on the Index because the Roman Catholic Church had banned them. And this is actually even happening with Twitter with their information warnings. And this is the thing, is we don't necessarily trust any institutions to be the arbiters of truth and falsehood. And our cultural habit, which I think we should preserve, is to give that to the individual and to society as a whole.
I'm really curious, especially with recent events. Do you think that if we offer that, like the arbitration of truth, to society as a whole and the individual, do you think that a random nobody on the street should have as much say in what is medically true as a doctor?
Sorry,
Especially
I don't understand the question.
If it is up to society to determine what is and is not true, does this mean that if enough people think that, for example, masks don't work, or that COVID isn't a big deal, that those
Oh my
people
God.
get to decide what is true as much
So who
as
gets to
medical
decide
truth?
where we're
Because that's
going?
essentially what you're
Only scientists?
I'm sorry, how am I
Scientism?
proposing that?
because you're saying that the arbitration of truth should be left up to society.
Who should
So,
it
for
be
example,
left up to?
The
If it's
accusation
not
of widespread
society,
voter
it's not
fraud
the
during
government,
regulatory
it's not the
exams,
company.
This is unsubstantiated.
It's the doctor.
And yet,
Who?
a lot of people seem to believe it anyways.
Should we
So
train
at least one
doctors now
sector
to be
has
better
voted that we should
arbiters of
overturn
truth?
the democratic
To take
process in order
responsibility?
to, endorse it.
Jangles. But
This is
how
stupid.
does this follow, right? Because we're saying the only thing that Andrew proposed was a set of common sense, neutral regulations about the kinds of things that could be taken off the platform. The mainstream media, with the New York Times and CNN, pursued for 2 years a Russia collusion investigation that yielded absolutely no results. If the social media had quashed that, I mean, that seems to me that would be a corporate intrusion, even if the claims about Russian collusion had no supporting evidence against them.
Hey, quick question. How would we
how
define
can this
something as
possibly? I
neutral?
mean, essentially, I'm not done. Yeah, the two options: the government regulates it, which seems reasonable.
No, there's
although
more.
it creates a backup
There's more than
question,
2.
right? The government
But
finds
all
truth.
of them are shit.
Or we have sort of an open market.
And
option,
really what Jangles
right,
is saying
where
is
a lot of people can
not
discuss
the
it. But
society,
you're proposing
because
where
it contains
you're
stupid
ground,
people
where
who are
corporate monopoly gets to
homophobic.
determine what's truth, and
It's
their
not the
monopoly
government
gets to
because it
determine what's
contains
truth.
stupid people who are
Under no
homophobic.
possible
It's
way
not
of
even the
assessing
doctor,
the facts. Can I make that even make sense?
because it could contain. It's him. He is the
And what you're,
arbiter.
I mean, now wait,
You
I'm
can read a
curious. Of
horse
those
to
two
water,
other
but you
options,
can't
of the
make
two
her drink.
extremes, you're saying somewhere in the
Now,
middle.
I've been
The
trying
government
to work
regulates
with
truth
Iris Tanner
versus the
for
open market of
years,
truth. Which
but the
one of
stubborn
those
mayor
are
always brushes me off.
What we're saying, and Andrew, I'm glad
And
Andrew outlined this.
requests
We're saying
that
that we could
promise a
have
good pay,
some very
nothing
neutral
helped.
regulations, and he
Always the
proposed 2 of
same
them.
response.
The first
I don't
regulation he
do biz
proposed,
with
and I
fixers.
apologize if I'm misstating this, Andrew,
But
was
today
to
she
have
has
sort of
changed her tune.
a regulation,
And why?
allow these systems to make a regulation on how
She's been
this was
kidnapped by
expressed,
race.
aka the difference between critique and
Petty
blasphemy.
society. If you help her,
And
I bet she
this
will
would allow
finally
them to get rid of
toss me
things
a
like
bone.
slurs,
The gig details are attached.
racial slurs,
Go fetch
and
me.
profanity and pornography, but it would keep the information intact. The other thing was an open protocol regulation, right? Which is an open protocol regulation is completely neutral because it doesn't even touch the problem of the content of speech, but it allows multiple different actors to essentially demonopolize these large industries. In order for what we are seem to be proposing is that the Facebook and Twitter moderation teams are the new arbiters of truth, which are completely privately owned. I just feel like I'm hearing tactical anarchism here. Tactical
Okay.
anarcho-capitalism.
Can I ask you a couple of quick, just
There
back-to-back
we go.
questions?
Sure.
All right, so as much as we're going to keep this on the broader philosophical point of what it is that we need to be doing as far as regulation is concerned, we are talking about the current status quo when we're making those decisions, right?
I don't understand the nature of that question.
So
what
we're
are you
talking about whether or not government in general should be regulating Twitter and Facebook, but are we talking about that in the current status quo? So are we talking about
We
like
proposed
Tells me
2
they suspect the
regulations.
cybercycles the
Well,
cause,
Andrew
and it's
proposed
got
2
them spooked.
regulations. I'm sure I could
Check
come
it
up
out,
with
but
other
no killing if you
regulations
can
that
help
I
it.
would like. But there were 2 regulations that could be introduced to the status quo that would make the situation much better.
Okay,
My favorite
so
one-
can you name one time anybody's been banned off of Facebook or Twitter outside of violating their terms of service?
The terms of service are flexible.
Sure,
They can say that
Alex
they violate
Jones.
the terms of service.
He violated nothing.
For instance, I'll give you an example. Like, I believe Stefan Molyneux banned off of Twitter, and they didn't
Sure.
give him any response for what the violation of terms of service was.
Exactly.
Yeah, there are also lots of examples of people saying race hatred things about whites, but the same exact phrases against
Yeah, that's a
like
good example.
Jews or blacks don't yeah. So,
Yeah,
So,
what,
would you say that the government has to step in?
Compare Sarah Zhang to Jared Taylor, right? What did Jared Taylor say that got him banned that Sarah Zhang didn't say?
I'm curious, do you think that the government should step in and say that no, Twitter, you cannot ban Stefan Molyneux or Jared Taylor from this platform?
I'm saying that Twitter, in order to be considered a platform, has to have formalized rules that when they interfere, I think, and I don't want to speak for Andrew here, my preferred regulation is the regulation Andrew mentioned about open protocol. That's the best one. But failing that, if we have to be more specific, what I would require is that I would require a formal, for these monopoly corporations that have 80-90% of the market share in terms of Twitter and Facebook between them, I would require that they actually have a legally binding terms of service that could go under review. And if they do not apply consistently, then we just yank their platform status, which will immediately make them go out of business.
Yeah,
And this consistently applied will be determined by the government. So we've essentially kicked the can down the road to people with guns.
I'm sorry, are you a narco-capitalist? Like, you
No,
understand
I'm
that we have
not.
regulation? Okay, but you understand we have regulation? Like,
And
No,
do you
but
think-
what
do
he
you
is
think
doing
do you think
is
that I'm
he's
fighting
very-
against regulations?
Look, he's
Like,
very
of course
clearly
I would.
pointing out the fact that you're not actually solving the problem.
This critique you're making is just an argument against regulation altogether. So
Yeah.
I would say that, like, Dow Chemicals has to submit to the EPA to determine that its pipes are clean, right? And Dow Chemicals has its own internal cleanliness regulations. And without just saying, like, you're just kicking the can down the road to the EPA, well, I guess I am, right? But the whole idea of regulations is that the government is a different entity with different incentives than Dow Chemical Company is. The whole idea about having a regulatory system on top of corporations is that the regulatory system of government is, I mean, I don't know if you're getting this. The regulatory system of government has different incentives and is a different party than the corporation it's regulating.
Do you believe that there's a fundamental similarity between the EPA and the way that the EPA would regulate and the way that we'd be talking about free speech issues inside of the United States?
I'm waiting for a difference. You have to show me a difference here. Like, the question is, there's always a relative standard about openness for platforms like Twitter and Facebook. There's also a relative standard of cleanliness. Right now, saying that the government regulation is kicking the can down the road is not an argument against social media regulation. It's just an argument against all regulation.
Well, look, in this
I have no idea where you're coming from with this. Yeah, I have no idea where you're coming from this, because in our conversations, like when we were trying to lead up to this, we agreed that no, like, of course the government can regulate these platforms insofar as, like, legality is concerned. No one here, and least of all us, and I feel like you're unintentionally strawmanning us, are saying that there should be no government regulations of platforms whatsoever. What we're trying to get at, and what I think we understood the debate to be, or at least I did, is that you think that platforms should not be able to censor someone based on views they don't like. I don't like that either, and that could absolutely come and bite me in the butt. But the difference is, much as I don't like that platforms can censor me if they decide that they don't like my views, I like even less the notion that the government would be in charge of that decision.
Okay, so let's say that the Twitter just destroyed all progressive accounts on its service. Like, that wouldn't be a regulatable action?
Nope.
They just decided to do that?
No, we would have to hope that the public would step in and, like, no, we're not going to use this anymore. It's ineffective.
So it's just a free market.
Yeah, that's an extreme hypothetical, though. That's not anywhere close to what's happening here.
It's not hypothetical. I mean,
it is hypothetical.
So you're basically saying
it's entirely a hypothetical unless you're actually insinuating inside of this conversation that for some reason all of conservatism is being banned and moved off of Twitter.
Yeah, but
is it just me, or is anyone else not hearing?
I don't have them at all.
Super robot.
Distributist, we can't. I hate to interrupt, but we can't hear you at all. People won't be able to hear you at all. Distributist, can you hear us? I don't think he can hear us either. Distributist, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Okay. I think we'll. Oh wait, did we just lose him? No. Hold on a second. He is dropped. Hopefully he'll be back in a moment. But we'll give Andrew, if you'd like a chance to jump in. This is a great opportunity.
Sure. So Jangles was talking about how, like, I seem to be implying, or to him, it seemed like I was implying that truth would become like a democracy if we gave it to society rather than to companies. And basically, the point that I'll make to that, Jangles, is that the mechanisms for determining what truth are discourse and hierarchies. And the way that social media ties into that is social media needs to be transparent to those, so that social media is itself not altering the structures that we have in society for determining what truth is. And that it's only supposed to lubricate and make things easier to communicate. And by marking disinformation or things like that as the platform, they're mixing these responsibilities in a way that it is open to significant conflict.
It could be, but so for example, when we say that this claim about election fraud is disputed, that was considered censorship by a lot of people who apparently don't know what censorship is. But just something like that, that is provably true by any reasonable definition of truth.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that's true of literally almost any claim of political import, is that there are conflicting views on it or disputations about it, right? And so that's the question, is who gets to decide what institutions to trust? Is that an individual choice, or is that something that comes part and parcel of using a platform?
I mean, this wouldn't interfere with what you're proposing, though, right? If a social media company just says that claim, that this claim is disputed, it's still left up to the individual as to who to trust. We haven't determined that Twitter is the arbiter of truth by putting that disclaimer on there. So it's just...
Well, let's look at it a little bit differently, right? What we're talking about was actual censorship, not just marqueing things. If Twitter determines that it's disinformation and takes it off the platform, then you're implicitly trusting Twitter for two things. You're trusting it for providing the platform and for being the arbiter of truth. And that's the issue, is that these mechanisms they have for community guidelines that are attempting to create a civic discourse are being abused to be used against views, not just the tone or cordiality of the environment.
I'm not going to sit here and defend Twitter and defend the way that Twitter tends to run its platform. I actually don't like a lot of their decisions, but can you give me one example of that happening that we can actually pull from and kind of parse through to see if we actually agree or disagree on this?
Well, sure. One Twitter account says it'll be fun to kill all white people, and another Twitter account says it's fun to kill all black people. And the one that said kill all white people. Yeah, and
so literally someone did this and demonstrated there was a different response.
Oh. And the one that said kill all white people was allowed, and the one that said kill all black people got banned. Right?
Yeah, okay. That's what happened.
So,
in that decision, but also like, you want the government stepping in to dictate what Twitter can and cannot allow.
Yes.
Jangles, like, hasn't the government been enforcing racial fairness since the 60s?
Yeah.
So how is this libertarian argument coming out of left field?
Because it's not libertarian.
Like
hate speech. Yeah, there's nothing legal about it. Hate speech is not illegal in the United States. Essentially, what you're saying is hate speech ought to be illegal.
No, I'm saying that if you have a hate speech law, you have to enforce it equally against blacks and whites.
Okay, but we don't have a hate speech law. Yeah, we don't.
I meant euphemistically. I mean hate speech regulation on your platform. You have to apply it equally. And you're saying we can't force companies to treat racists equally?
No, we can definitely lobby them to do that. We can definitely lobby them to do that, but again, hate speech is in the United States.
Is the Civil Rights Act forcing corporations to treat racists equally? Is that lobbying them to treat racists equally, or is that actually a law? Not so much if that's not.
Sorry, is it or is it not illegal to say I hate X group of people? Is it legal to say that? The answer to that in the United States, the answer to that question is yes. Hate speech is not illegal in the United States.
So the entire point, getting back to this is an example of Twitter engaging in not even-handed censorship, right? And the question seems to be, or at least my understanding was, can the government regulate Twitter to force them to have consistent policies?
It's not about whether or not they can, because obviously they can. It's the government. What we need to be talking about is whether or not they should.
Why? Okay, so why shouldn't they?
I think there are plenty of reasons that they shouldn't. Primarily, I think that the biggest problem that we end up running into if we give government control over these platforms is the fact that now all of a sudden we have a system where the government gets to decide who does and doesn't get to stay on the platform. It's not like censorship goes away. We now just have legally codified reasons people can and can't be censored when these things get taken to court.
Oh,
awesome.
fuck.
Great. It's an improvement. Everything is formalized and we know what the rules are.
Okay, so what happens if you guys in particular were to lose a court case and now all of the social media platforms can just take you off? Does that actually solve the problem?
Yes,
it does, because the court's required to have a consistency. The terms of service are not. The terms of service can be rewritten, and they are rewritten regularly. If you check your email, you'll have plenty of terms of service updates in your inbox from every social media platform you follow, if you allow
So then why not go to a different platform?
The courts cannot do that. The courts have to operate through the law, which has a series of regulations that move much slower and has a variety of oversight mechanisms to keep these things safely in place.
Okay, but do you not understand that the biggest problem there is that when you lose at a governmental level, all of a sudden it's perfectly fine to absolutely excise somebody from society rather than the subjective opinions of Facebook, Twitter, or any of these entities on their own?
Okay, but this is like saying that, like, what if the seatbelt fails type deal. You know, the idea is we're introducing a second level of protection. Right now, Twitter could just ban me for whatever reason it wants and change its terms of service retroactively.
Yeah, go to Facebook.
As we have demonstrated several. They have incredibly. It's something like there's two companies, right? So these are the two systems, and they both have.
I think big tech is coming down on Dave again. What we'll do, Distributist, I'm so sorry. We might have to just kind of wait, you know, kind of weather the storm.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah,
so the real big tech is ISPs.
Luckily, they're, well,
Dave, you can't hear us.
The worst roboting I've ever heard.
That was intense. Are you still there, Dave?
Interesting.
Dave. Oh, we lost Dave. Okay, don't worry. He'll be back, folks. Go ahead, whoever was about to jump in.
Sure. Well, and this is the thing, right? Is by saying, "Oh, just go to another platform," you are basically being locked out of the mainstream discourse. And the entire point we're talking about isn't about the government determining what can be censored, but is the government taking action so that views aren't censored just because of the information content that they have.
So I don't want to strawman you. So there are, platforms should be allowed to censor certain views even if they're illegal, correct? So for example,
and this is the exact same argument.
No.
Can you hear me now?
Roboting again. No, well, you're roboting again.
Dave, I'm so sorry. We're not laughing at you, man. It's just that I don't know if you can hear me right now, but your connection, you probably already noticed yourself. It's not super strong tonight. Can you hear us? Well, okay. What was it? I think that Jangles was gonna say.
I think it was about. I guess I'll ask Andrew, but if Dave can hear me, he can answer as well. So, should a platform be able to decide what is objectionable beyond what the government says, beyond legality? So, for example, should every single platform be allowed to host pornography, or should they be decide, platform by platform, whether they will or not host adult content? Because adult content is completely legal in the United States, and So does that mean that a platform is censoring certain forms of speech, censoring certain forms of information if they decide that they do not want to have this content on this platform?
I think that every platform should be allowed to censor the form that content takes, but not necessarily the content. So, for example, showing a couple engaging in sex graphically, not everyone has to allow that. But Twitter needs to be able to say that, I had sex with my wife. Right? That is conveying the same information in a different form that is not obscene. And that's the issue, is that that type of information needs to be everywhere for us to be a society where we can find truth effectively.
So can people hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you.
So I wanted to add something to this whole, go to a different platform type deal, or build your own Google type thing.
I don't believe
this is the same arguments that railroad monopolies use to justify their own monopoly and the inability of the government to regulate it in the early 20th century. The idea was, well, we don't have a monopoly, we just control all the railroads. If you don't want to use a railroad, just use a cart and buggy. I feel that that's kind of, I don't know how serious I'm supposed to actually take this. Again, I understand if you're a narco-capitalist and you don't think there's a right to do this. I don't understand how, you understand that there's a certain amount of...
I don't appreciate the straw manning of going for the ANCAP point all the time. Partially because, unlike when we're talking about railways, there are legitimate differences with the internet. Primarily, while you might be able to say that Facebook and Twitter have a monopoly over social media, they don't have a monopoly over the internet as a whole. There's always going to be a way to get these information out, and just because somebody gets kicked off of Facebook or Twitter, they're not necessarily going to be kicked off of the other one. Meanwhile, you have a situation where
your solution was, if you get kicked off of Twitter, you've got your website. I mean, that's very much like saying, because the social media technology, I'm old enough to remember Web 1.0. You're saying that we can essentially bar you from using Web 2.0 and the social networks that it contains, to go back to using internet the way it was used in the 90s, so when you use your website or directly checks your information.
Assuming you don't...
Is that not...
One second. Go ahead, Jordan.
Is that not the same as the system that we currently have with these giant monolithic platforms? I mean, it's not like anybody's necessarily, going to be able to find your YouTube page unless it randomly shows up either A, in recommended, the same way that it would with retweets or anything else, or B, by actually searching you out. I don't see how Web 2.0 and Web 1.0 are necessarily all that different. It's just different mediums of accessing the same information.
Live around here?
one of which is owned by a private company.
I understand why this makes sense for you to argue because you want to win this debate. I don't think you believe that. You can just look, if you take an article and just post it to a website and prevent anyone from sharing it on Facebook and Twitter, that article will get almost no views. But if you take that same article and post it on Twitter and Facebook and allow people to share it through networks and allow it to go viral, you'll have like a 3 order of magnitude difference. You must know that this is the case. That this can be demonstrated scientifically.
Okay, now let's say that article is, I forgot his name. Who was he was a meme a while back, but it turns out not to be a meme. It's advocating a certain form of sexual abuse. So let's say that this is an article making arguments in favor of a certain form of sexual abuse. Do you think a platform should not be allowed to prevent the spread of that article? Because it is information.
I think that the advocacy of things that are illegal is already something that that people have the ability to regulate. That's not under contention in any of the examples we gave.
Wait a second.
Furthermore, it's not
so
just
if something
wait, are you tactically missing the point?
No, I have to. No,
Jangles,
I
are you
no.
tactically missing the point here?